In early January 2025, a satellite captured a curious image of an unusual ship under construction in a dry dock in Guangga, a Chinese megacity near the southern coast. The strange-looking vessel drew attention from a few foreign intelligence analysts, who speculated that it might be a new type of Chinese landing vessel. Just 2 months later, in March 2025, the completed ship, along with two similar vessels, was spotted again by satellite, this time off China's far southern coastline, engaging in a series of intriguing maneuvers. The satellite imagery revealed the three barges connecting to form a massive causeway, stretching from the rearmost barge through to the front one, and extending directly toward a beach. Alongside them, Chinese civilian cargo ships and ferries were seen practicing similar maneuvers. Only weeks after these satellite sightings, a series of ground-level photos taken by the Chinese themselves began circulating online, offering a clearer view of the exercises from the beach. These images showed the full length of the connected barges and an offloading ramp leading directly onto the shore, wide enough to accommodate the deployment of a heavy main battle tank. These developments quickly led many analysts to conclude that the barges were likely a new element in China's evolving strategy for a potential invasion of Taiwan. The Chinese government views Taiwan as a renegade province, and President Xi Jinping has repeatedly vowed to bring it under Chinese Communist Party control, whether through diplomatic means or military force. One of the largest challenges China has faced in executing an all-out invasion of Taiwan is its geographical reality, being an island. Transporting troops, vehicles, and equipment across the sea would require a massive amphibious assault, reminiscent of the D-Day landings in World War II. China understands that such an operation involves two key phases. The first phase involves a direct beach assault, overcoming defenses and establishing a foothold. The second, more complex phase involves sustaining that foothold and expanding deeper into enemy territory, an objective that these new barges appear specifically designed to support. To sustain a beachhead during an amphibious invasion, it is crucial to provide continuous logistical support, including reinforcements, ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies, and other essential materials. Without such support, the invading forces risk being cut off, surrounded in hostile territory, and ultimately collapsing from within. To avoid this, invading armies typically aim to capture a nearby port that is close to the initial landing zone. This port then serves as the main channel for bringing in necessary supplies and reinforcements to hold the beachhead and push further into enemy territory. However, capturing an intact and operational enemy harbor near the landing site is extremely difficult. Ports are often heavily defended and, even if seized, are likely to be sabotaged and damaged by retreating forces, requiring extensive time and resources to repair. During the Allied invasion of Normandy in World War II, this challenge was addressed through the creation of the now famous Mulberry Harbors, a solution that has almost certainly been closely studied by Chinese military planners in relation to a possible Taiwan invasion. Rather than wasting time and manpower capturing German-held ports, the Allies brought their own portable harbors with them. Within hours of establishing beachheads on D-Day, sections of the Mulberry Harbors were towed across the English Channel and assembled at two beachhead locations known as Mulberry A and Mulberry B. These temporary harbors consisted of floating breakwaters, pontoons, piers, and floating roadways, which allowed the Allies to quickly offload reinforcements and supplies directly onto the beach. This innovation made the beachhead sustainable and enabled the Allied forces to expand inland without relying on captured enemy ports. However, even this strategy had its setbacks. Mulberry Harbor A was destroyed by a severe storm just days after its completion, leaving the Allies dependent solely on Mulberry Harbor B for the following months. For China's modern considerations in launching a 21st century amphibious invasion of Taiwan, the challenges are even more formidable than those faced by the Allies during the Normandy landings of World War II. Although the distance the Chinese invasion fleet would have to cross over the Taiwan Strait is roughly comparable to the Allied crossing of the English Channel, The geography and coastal conditions around Taiwan pose unique and severe difficulties. Like the Germans in 1944, Taiwan's defenders would likely sabotage their own ports to prevent them from falling intact into Chinese hands. This means that, just like the Allies, China would need to bring its own portable harbor infrastructure to support and sustain any initial beachheads. However, deploying such infrastructure near Taiwan is significantly more complex. Much of Taiwan's coastline is encircled by broad coral reefs, which in many areas stretch hundreds of meters out from the shore. These reefs would make the use of portable harbor systems, like the World War II era Mulberry harbors, extremely difficult, if not impossible. Additionally, Taiwan's geography further narrows China's options. The island has very few beaches that are even remotely suitable for large-scale amphibious assaults. There are only 14 so-called red beaches scattered around the island that meet the necessary criteria: limited or no coral reefs, relatively flat terrain, and proximity to key strategic targets such as Taipei in the north and Kaohsiung, Taiwan's largest seaport, in the south. But Taiwan is fully aware of the vulnerability of these 14 red beaches, and as a result, they are the most heavily fortified and well-defended locations on the entire island. Any traditional amphibious assault on them would be highly dangerous and costly. In response to these challenges, China appears to have developed a new class of invasion barge, images of which have been circulating online in recent months. Western intelligence sources have dubbed these the Kowo-class vessels, borrowing from the Mandarin word for water bridge. These barges, believed to always operate in trios, are designed to overcome the very geographical and tactical problems Taiwan presents. When nearing a beachhead, the barges position themselves in a precise formation: the smallest barge in front, the medium-sized one in the middle, and the largest at the rear. Each barge is equipped with super heavy retractable legs, which remain stowed during transport. Once the barges reach their position off the coast, these legs are extended downward to anchor the vessel securely to the seabed. This lifts the barges' hulls out of the water, giving them exceptional stability even in turbulent coastal waters, functioning almost like small offshore oil platforms. Each of China's new invasion barges is equipped with a forward-mounted tower and a long bridge stored on its deck during transport. Once the barges are anchored and stabilized using the retractable legs, the towers extend telescoping bridges, forming a giant portable causeway that stretches from the rear barge to the center, then to the front, and finally onto the shore, spanning nearly 825 meters in total. Several analysts believe these heavy-duty bridges are strong enough to support and transport large military vehicles, including armored personnel carriers and main battle tanks. This configuration allows the barges, but the Schweinko or Schweck class, to function simultaneously as a movable port and a movable bridge. Working in tandem with China's civilian roll-on, roll-off, ro-ro ferries, which are designed for both commercial and military use, these barges could be critical for rapidly unloading military vehicles and equipment. The People's Liberation Army (PLA) can dock ro-ro ferries at the rear barge, unload their cargo, and then send the vehicles directly across the connected causeway to the beachhead. According to a paper written in March 2025 by analysts J. Michael Dom and Thomas Schugart from the China Maritime Studies Institute, the system could potentially offload a full combined arms battalion, including up to 150 vehicles, in just 40 to 60 minutes. Over a 24-hour period, multiple Schweck barge sets could collectively unload several hundred armored vehicles delivered by China's numerous dual-use ro-ro ferries. The strategic design of these barges allows them to remain offshore, avoiding shallow waters and coral reefs that dominate much of Taiwan's coastline. Their shallow draft and elevated platforms make them capable of operating even beyond the 14 known red beaches, Taiwan's few beaches that are suitable for amphibious landings, but are also heavily fortified. This opens the possibility for China to launch assaults at up to 40 additional, less defended beaches previously considered inaccessible, which could dilute Taiwan's defensive focus and force them to spread resources thinly across a broader front. In an even more aggressive scenario, the Shuek barges could extend their coastway directly onto one of Taiwan's coastal highways, allowing PLA forces to bypass beach defenses entirely and drive military vehicles straight onto the island's road network. These capabilities significantly increases the strategic threat posed by these platforms, transforming them into one of China's most innovative tools for expanding potential invasion entry points. However, the Shrek barges are not without vulnerabilities. Their deployment would almost certainly occur only after the PLA had achieved both maritime and aerial supremacy following the establishment of initial beachheads by first wave amphibious assaults. Without control of the sea and skies, these barges would be highly exposed and vulnerable to Taiwan's missile strikes, drone attacks, and artillery fire, essentially turning them into stationary targets. Moreover, all current satellite observations of these vessels have shown them operating only in calm waters. This raises doubts about their performance in the unpredictable and often stormy conditions of the Taiwan Strait. A historical precedent underscores this concern. During the D-Day invasion of Normandy, one of the Allied Mulberry harbors was destroyed by a storm just days after being established. In apparent anticipation of such a risk, satellite imagery has already revealed that a second set of Shrek barges is under construction at the Guangzhou shipyard, suggesting that China is preparing backups to ensure operational continuity if one set fails during combat or due to weather. If China builds enough of these Schweinko barges, they could help the country overcome what is arguably the greatest strategic challenge in any invasion of Taiwan, seizing control of the island swiftly and decisively, before external powers like the United States, Japan, or Australia have the chance to intervene. Should the initial PLA amphibious assaults succeed in establishing beachheads, much like the Allied forces did during the Normandy landings, and if China can deploy its cow barges and commandeered civilian roll-on, roll-off ferries within hours, mirroring the Allied use of Mulberry harbors, it would dramatically accelerate the pace of the invasion. Analyst Thomas Shugart, in his March 2025 paper, theorized that under such ideal conditions, China could unload up to 8 heavy brigades, approximately 60,000 troops with full vehicle and equipment support, within just the first 24 hours of the invasion. Additional reinforcements would then follow over subsequent days. If the PLA manages to achieve such a rapid and overwhelming foothold, it's conceivable that Taiwan could fall before allied nations have time to mount an effective military response. In this sense, the Schweinko barges act not just as physical military assets, but also as psychological tools. They serve as a visible symbol of China's serious investment in amphibious invasion capabilities, reinforcing President Xi Jinping's frequent threats about forcibly unifying Taiwan with the mainland. The mere existence and visibility of these barges may be intended to convince Taiwan's leadership that resistance is futile and surrender might be the safer option. However, using the barges at all depends on the PLA's ability to overcome immense resistance during the critical first phase of the invasion. Taiwan's defenders will fight fiercely to prevent any beachhead from being established. The PLA would also likely face coordinated opposition from regional powers like the US, Japan, the Philippines, and Australia. If these countries intervene early and decisively, they could deny China the ability to establish a foothold, rendering the cow barges irrelevant. This underscores a key point. For these barges to be credible, not just as military hardware, but as instruments of psychological warfare, China must also be able to deter outside intervention. To that end, China is actively preparing far beyond the Taiwan Strait. In the remote deserts of northern and northwestern China, thousands of kilometers away from the island, lies the Dingxin test and training base, located in China's portion of the Gobi Desert. This sprawling facility is used by the People's Liberation Army Air Force, PLAAF, for weapons testing, systems integration, training exercises, and tactical development. Its isolated location and vast open-air space make it ideal for large-scale military simulations, drawing comparisons to the U.S. Air Force's Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Not far from Dingxing, in another desolate desert region known as the Taklamakan, satellite imagery has revealed unusual and significant developments, hints that suggest the PLA Air Force is training for scenarios directly related to a potential Taiwan invasion, including how to counter or deter any foreign military intervention. On the 1st of January of 2024, Planet Labs released an image that one of their satellites had captured in China's remote Taklamakan Desert, showing what looks like a mock-up of an aircraft carrier. And not just any aircraft carrier, but a nearly perfect one-to-one identical mock-up of one of America's most advanced current nuclear-powered supercarriers, the Gerald R. Ford class. There is a structure in the mock-up that's almost precisely in the same location as the Ford class's island. And there are exactly 4 mocked-up catapult launcher tracks on the deck that are located exactly where they appear on the real Ford class carrier. Based on Planet Labs data, it appears that the PLA began constructing this mock-up US carrier in the desert sometime in November of 2023, fairly recently. However, going further back in time, there's been a general outline of an aircraft carrier here in this exact location for a while, since at least 2021. Before it was completely filled in with a full aircraft carrier that we can see now, the PLA had built 2 smaller aircraft carriers within the overall silhouette. And interestingly, this aircraft carrier is far from the only American ship that the Chinese have built a one-to-one replica of out here in the desert. In fact, the area is almost littered with them. Just 4.5 kilometers away to the northwest is another full-scale replica of another US Ford-class aircraft carrier. And dotted all around nearby are multiple 1-in-1 mock-ups of what appear to be Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, one of the US Navy's most modern and capable class of destroyers at the present that are typically used to escort carriers in a strike group formation. But most interestingly of all is this line that snakes across the desert in between all these mock-ups of US warships. This line appears to be a very large railroad, roughly 6 meters in width, approaching 4 to 5 times as wide as a usual railroad is. Interestingly, this super wide railroad begins at what appears to be a storage facility of some sort, and then extends for several kilometers in a straight line before curving rapidly through the desert, and then curving again to simply end in the middle of nowhere. The railroad doesn't curve to avoid any obstacles in the flat desert, and the reason why it curves this way starts to become apparent when you see other photos of the railroad and understand what its true purpose is. Yeah, the PLA is using the railroad to load up one-to-one models of US warships, like the Ford-class aircraft carrier, and then sends them down the railroad to simulate a moving target for the Air Force and Rocket Force to fire at. That curve through the desert appears designed to simulate a carrier's evasive maneuvers through the ocean that it would take to avoid an incoming missile. There's other satellite photos of mocked-up carriers on this exact railroad blown to bits after being targeted by missiles and rockets. And there are satellite photos of the stationary aircraft targets blown to pieces as well. It's pretty clear what the PLA is preparing for here. But if it wasn't already obvious, the location of all of these ship mock-ups in the Taklamakan Desert isn't chosen just for its remoteness or the clear open skies. The location is also about 2,600 kilometers away from known People's Liberation Army rocket force launch sites in China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. That distance closely matches the range required to simulate long-range missile strikes from central China into the South China Sea, a region China aggressively claims almost in full, despite competing territorial claims from the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia. Far away in the similarly remote deserts of Inner Mongolia, near those PLA rocket force launch sites, is another striking feature that the PLA constructed near the end of 2022. At first glance, it might not look like much, but when seen alongside satellite images with roads marked out in red, it becomes clear that this is an almost exact one-to-one mock-up of the area surrounding the presidential office in downtown Taipei. This area of Taipei is similar in function and symbolism to the National Mall in Washington, D.C., hosting Taiwan's most sensitive and vital government buildings. The mock-up's close proximity to a PLA Air Force bombing and gunnery training range suggests its likely use for simulating precision aerial strikes on the political heart of Taiwan's capital. China's use of such mock-ups, both in the desert for anti-ship missile testing and near aerial bombing ranges for urban strike simulation, is a strong indicator of how the PLA is sharpening its tools to conduct future warfare. They're training on one-to-one replicas, some of which are mobile and simulate evasive maneuvers, reveals a growing sophistication and realism in Chinese military exercises. These developments reflect China's ability to target US warships and challenge the United States' capacity to project power in the Western Pacific. What's perhaps most revealing is that China isn't hiding any of this. Just like the cow invasion barges, the destruction of one-to-one mock-ups of US warships in the Taklamakan Desert is an overt message to Washington that American vessels could be vulnerable and even destroyed should they intervene in a Taiwan conflict. Such mock-ups serve both psychological and operational purposes. Over the last several years, China has launched the most massive military buildup ever seen in human history. Much of that expansion has been focused specifically on neutralizing American advantages in the Pacific region. A large portion of China's investment has gone into the PLA rocket force, which now possesses the largest land-based missile arsenal in the world. Estimates suggest that China holds around 3,100 conventionally armed ballistic and cruise missiles, covering a wide spectrum of ranges and payloads, ready for deployment in a Taiwan scenario. These missiles would allow China to unleash massive pre-invasion barrages against military targets in Taiwan, paving the way for a full-scale amphibious invasion. And they also give China the ability, if they so choose, to attack US and allied military targets throughout the Western Pacific from the relative safety of the Chinese mainland as well, with hundreds of their longer-range conventional missiles capable of striking targets accurately as far away as Guam. The fear on the American side is that China is equipped with enough of these anti-ship missiles to attack virtually every US warship in the South China Sea and near Taiwan with enough firepower to overwhelm each individual ship's own onboard missile defense systems. The US, of course, is well aware of the Chinese missile threat to their surface warships, which is a major part of why the US military has shifted so much to a strategy of countering China by positioning air, missile, and rapid amphibious response assets of their own nearby to Taiwan on land bases in Japan and the Philippines instead. But China has been hard at work developing other counters as well. China has a vastly larger capacity to construct new ships than the US or any other country in the world has. The US currently only possesses 4 state-owned shipyards, while China possesses dozens of them. China possesses a staggering 230 times the shipbuilding capacity of the United States right now. To put this into perspective, just one single state-owned shipbuilder in China built more vessels by tonnage in 2024 alone than the United States has collectively built since the end of World War II to the present. This staggering shipbuilding advantage has helped China seize the title of the world's largest navy today. And the types of ships China is building are not only designed to carry out an invasion of Taiwan, like the cow barges and the countless dual-use civilian and military roll-on roll-off ferries, but some are also specifically built to counter the US Navy's remaining advantages in the region. While the PLA rocket force has been carefully calibrated to counter US surface warships, that still leaves behind the incredibly advanced and capable US nuclear submarine fleet that operates beneath the surface, a threat that the rocket force's missiles cannot neutralize. The United States has, by far, the largest and most competent nuclear submarine fleet in the world, which could be brought to bear on China's Taiwan invasion fleet as it attempts to cross the Taiwan Strait. But China is developing counters to this threat as well. One advantage for China is the geography of the Taiwan Strait itself, its relatively shallow depth. The average depth is only about 60 meters, which makes it significantly easier to locate and attack submarines operating there than in deeper ocean waters. To address this challenge, China recently commissioned its newest class of guided missile stealth frigate, the Type 054B, into the People's Liberation Army Navy in January of 2025. This vessel is purpose-built for anti-submarine warfare. China has the huge shipbuilding capacity to begin rapidly churning out a large number of these anti-submarine stealth frigates over the coming years. If they are able to concentrate enough of them in the Taiwan Strait in time to escort an invasion fleet, they could pose a major threat to any U.S. nuclear submarines operating beneath the strait. While those frigates would handle underwater threats, the PLA rocket force on the Chinese mainland can pose an equally serious threat to U.S. surface warships operating near Taiwan. This dual threat environment would dramatically raise the stakes for any U.S. decision to intervene in a conflict over Taiwan. China is also using its military buildup to send a very clear message, not just to the US, but to other American allies in the Pacific as well, especially Australia. Earlier this year, on February 11, 2025, a Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy planned frigate appeared off the northern coast of Australia and then sailed through the Torres Strait between Australia and Papua New Guinea. Initially, this movement attracted little attention, but as the frigate moved along the east coast of Australia, it was soon joined by two additional planned warships, a cruiser and a replenishment tanker. Together, the group transited through the Coral Sea and continued moving further south before briefly entering Australia's exclusive economic zone near Sydney. Public concern in Australia dramatically escalated a few days later when the planned vessels began issuing radio broadcasts to commercial airlines, warning them of live fire exercises being conducted in the area between Australia and New Zealand. The Australian Civil Aviation Service was forced to issue an emergency alert, causing nearly 50 commercial flights to divert their routes away from the danger zone. Afterward, the planned ships continued south of Tasmania, entered and exited Australia's exclusive economic zone again, and then traveled westward, coming within just 170 nautical miles of Perth. This happened only days after a US nuclear submarine had visited a nearby naval base. The planned vessels eventually began heading north again toward China after spending nearly a full month at sea, effectively completing a full circumnavigation of the Australian continent. This was a completely unprecedented show of Chinese naval force that left many Australians feeling deeply exposed and vulnerable. This show of force came at a particularly sensitive time in Australian history. The Royal Australian Navy has been declining in readiness and capability for years, and it is now considered to be in its weakest state since the Second World War. Additionally, Australia's traditional alliance with the United States is being tested as political tensions grow, especially with Donald Trump having returned to the White House. Meanwhile, the planned frigate and cruiser that encircled Australia carried with them a combined total of 144 vertical launch missile cells, demonstrating that China's projection of power is not just symbolic, it's real and operationally threatening. Interestingly, the entire Australian Navy's 10 warships combined have a total of just around 200 vertical launch missile cells. It was also the furthest south that the plan has ever sailed, and the message it sent to Australia was crystal clear. Even though Beijing stated that the warships were operating entirely within international waters and that they had every legal right to do so, just as other navies do, the implication was unmistakable. The message was that the Australian homeland could be vulnerable to Chinese military action if Australia or the US military bases in Australia intervened during a Taiwan invasion scenario. This show of strength came as China's navy continued to expand its presence in other regions as well. During the same month, the planned flotilla was circumnavigating Australia. The Japanese defense minister revealed that Chinese warships had passed through the waters around Japan's southern Ryukyu Islands, between the Japanese mainland and Taiwan, a total of 68 times in 2024. This marked a massive increase in activity compared to the only 21 reported passages in 2021. A few months later, in June 2025, the same Japanese defense minister announced that a Chinese aircraft carrier, the Liaoning, had been spotted in waters east of the island of Iwima. This marked the first confirmed instance of a Chinese aircraft carrier sailing beyond the so-called Second Island Chain, the US's rear line of defense against China, centered on Guam. Perhaps most notably, however, is a massive construction project recently identified via satellite imagery just southwest of Beijing, China's capital. When viewed in satellite imagery from February 5, 2022, just over 3 years ago, there was not much happening at the site. But fast forward 1 year to February 25, 2023, and the area had been completely cleared, with all previously existing residential buildings flattened and removed. Then, by June 26, 2024, about another year later, a massive new construction project had clearly taken shape, transforming the area into something unrecognizable compared to early 2022. By March 2025, just months later, a complex of buildings had begun forming at the center of the site, with dozens of construction cranes still actively at work. The scale of the development suggests a truly enormous construction effort. Yet, Chinese government websites have provided no public commentary on the project so far. Additionally, Chinese authorities have refused to answer journalists' questions regarding the purpose of the site. This silence has fueled widespread speculation online about what this massive and mysterious construction project might actually be. And to most outsiders, it certainly appears to be something military-related. The final image of the construction site taken in March of 2025 appears to show around 100 construction cranes active at the site that are busy building deep subterranean tunnels, facilities, and passageways. These structures all seem to be reinforced by thick layers of concrete, making whatever is going on here appear to be an extremely sensitive military PLA site. The area is truly massive, covering around 1,500 acres or 5 square kilometers in total. In other words, it's roughly 10 times the size of the Pentagon near Washington, D.C., the building usually regarded as the world's largest office building. Some high-ranking U.S. defense officials believe that the site is being constructed to provide high-level Chinese officials greater protection from advanced U.S. bunker-buster munitions during wartime, or even from U.S. nuclear weapons. This belief is based on the extensive and deep subterranean construction underway at the site and the extreme level of secrecy surrounding it. It's probable that, with the site being located so close to Beijing, this new complex could become the PLA's new top military headquarters. It could serve as China's wartime command center during an invasion of Taiwan scenario. In this role, it would be highly similar to what the Pentagon does for the US military, but on a vastly larger physical scale. As is often the case with the People's Republic of China, matters such as massive underground military fortresses, barges designed for large armored amphibious invasions, and remote airfields used to simulate attacks on US warships near Taiwan are rarely ever acknowledged publicly by the government. While China has spent the past several decades gradually opening itself up to the world, it has also become increasingly authoritarian and centralized under the leadership and vision of Xi Jinping. Today, China is ranked as the third least free country in the world in terms of press freedom. It ranks just slightly above the blatantly totalitarian states of North Korea and Eritrea. There are still many elements about China that remain closely guarded and considered highly sensitive by the state. Perhaps none of those topics is more controversial, clouded by propaganda, or misunderstood than the events that took place 36 years ago in Tiananmen Square in Beijing in June of 1989. You're probably already familiar with this event, and you've likely heard of it referred to by many different names. People with various political agendas have attempted to label it in different ways, such as the Tiananmen Square Massacre, as it's often called in the West. In China, it is more commonly referred to as the June 4th incident. Others call it the more vague Tiananmen Square Incident or Tiananmen Uprising. Many of the photographs captured during the events of Tiananmen Square in 1989 have become some of the most iconic and widely recognized images ever taken in human history. Like the Tank Man photo, which shows a lone, never-identified unknown man standing defiantly in front of a column of People's Liberation Army tanks. These tanks were leaving Tiananmen Square just hours after the army had violently cleared the area of tens of thousands of student-led protesters. The details of exactly what happened during the 48 hours before this iconic photograph was taken remain one of the most contentious topics of the 21st century. The official story from the Chinese government is that only 241 people were killed during the PLA's two-day operation to remove protesters from the square. However, multiple outside Western sources reported significantly higher death tolls at the time. The US ambassador to China, who was present in Beijing during the crackdown, stated that at least several hundred people had been killed. Hospital records from Beijing, compiled shortly afterward, reported a minimum of 478 deaths that were likely caused by the events in the square. Amnesty International estimated the death toll to be between several hundred and close to 1,000. Meanwhile, the Chinese Red Cross initially reported a figure of around 2,600 deaths, but later retracted this number under pressure from the Chinese government. Similarly, the Swiss ambassador to China gave an estimate of approximately 2,700 people killed. There was also a much less credible initial estimate from the British ambassador to China, who claimed at least 10,000 deaths. However, he later revised his estimate downward to between 2,700 and 3,400 deaths. Determining the true scale of the violence that took place at Tiananmen Square in June 1989 is extremely difficult, if not impossible, for several reasons. First, the Chinese government goes to extreme lengths to censor the event and erase any memory or public discussion about it. Second, some Western sources may have had or still have incentives to embellish or exaggerate the brutality of the crackdown. To this day, searches for terms such as Tiananmen Square Massacre, June 4th, Tank Man, and even symbolic numbers like 64 for June 4th or 8,964 are blocked or yield no results on Chinese search engines like Baidu. Posts discussing the events on Chinese social media platforms, such as WeChat or Douyin, China's version of TikTok, are automatically deleted by algorithms or shadow banned from public view. The Tiananmen Square incident is entirely omitted from history textbooks across mainland China. Even foreign scholars who have published research about the events are often denied visas or access to Chinese historical archives. Altogether, this makes the Tiananmen Square crackdown not only the most heavily censored event in modern history, but arguably the most difficult modern historical topic to investigate and accurately document. Nonetheless, I still made an entire video about my own investigation into the Tiananmen Square June 1989 events as part of my Modern Conflicts series. This is a series where I release a new video every single month, diving deep into recent, controversial, and often darker subject matter surrounding modern wars, operations, and global conflicts. Over the past 4 years of creating Modern Conflicts, I've produced around 50 total episodes. These episodes cover a wide variety of topics, including the ongoing undeclared war and skirmishes between North and South Korea since 2000. Other episodes focus on China's policies of repression against its Muslim Uyghur population in Xinjiang. I've also documented the Myanmar civil war and the regime's modern genocide against its minority Rohingya people. Another episode highlights the border clashes between China and India across 2020 and 2021. And there are dozens of other investigations with new episodes like the Tiananmen Square 1989 one coming out every single month. All of these are available exclusively on Nebula.